So good evening and welcome to the second annual MEM Industry Night. My name is Mark Werwath. I'm the director of the Master of Engineering Management program here at Northwestern. This is the one night a year where MEM gets together to showcase our students, our faculty, our alumni, and our industry connections, our partners in industry that we work with throughout the year. We have an excellent program for you tonight. You're going to see and hear an excellent speech from Zack Johnson, but before we do that, I wanted to introduce to you our Dean of the McCormick School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, Julio Otino, and he'll give you a few words about where McCormick is and where it's going.
Thank you. So let me welcome. It's our pleasure to have you here. I see that in the program later on, for the ones who want to travel about 200-300 yards, you will see the new space where the program is. I do not know how many of you have seen it. So I think it's nice space is what the program sort of deserves. But let me start by apologizing, okay? The apologizing part is that we want to increase the level of connectivity that the school, McCormick, has with programs such as this. There is a lot of value in the people produced by this program, but we haven't kept up with the degree of contact that we should have. There is a lot that can be extracted back in the level of advice. Let me give you one little data point. In universities, produce lots of bachelor's degrees and lots of PhDs and masters. In a typical place, and I'm not hitting you on here in this, okay? In a typical place, Princeton, Stanford, just Cornell, about for $100 that you get from development, about 95 come from the undergraduate program. Masters are much more generous than PhDs, okay? But no matter what track you follow, universities are obsessive in tracking the undergrads, okay? And I will tell you, if that's a measure on how we are doing in Northwestern, we are doing great. And all the pieces are connected. The undergraduate program in here, then you have the PhD program in here, and the master's, professional and non-professional masters in the middle. So they are all connected. You cannot be doing great in one part and doing horrible in another one. They are all interconnected. Although, as I said, the degree of connectivity that we want to have from now on with programs like this, it's much more than we have had in the past. But just to give you a sense of the metrics of where we are at the undergraduate program, they all are the same thing in the following sense. You open the doors, talent applies. You accept a fraction, and then in a limited time span with a few connectivity touch points, the idea is that people emerge with a new draft of themselves. And our entire value resides on how the collection of people that you have produced do in the world. The better they do, the better we do, okay? So the question is a problem of optimization of human potential. What is that you can do with these people while they're here? So at the undergraduate level, 5-6 years ago, we were accepting 1 in 3, and our yield was about 22%. And we were 16% of the university. And Northwestern is not free market, okay? You apply to schools. It's not Princeton and Stanford. You apply, and then you decide what you want to do with your life. You go into engineering or communications or education or whatever. So the buckets, they have to be filled here. So we went from 1 in 3 to about 1 in 10, from a yield of about 22% to about 45% now, and from 16% of the university to about 21%. So that's the metric coming from that little section in there. But the idea of connectivity, us connecting with you and being more aware on where people in MEM are doing, I meet alums here or in Silicon Valley, or they are everywhere. But our record keeping has not been as good as the centralized record keeping of the university. The idea of being more connected is to also add value to you, because something that in the past, 20, 30 years ago, doing a program like MEM, you are moving through this highway of life, you are working somewhere, and you pick this little detour to add a discontinuity in the slope, and then you probably kept going up. But now, it's more of a possibility of reinvention and a possibility of discovering things. Lots of good things are happening in here, and we want you to make sure that you discover those things. There are in the world now lots of programs that people pay an enormous amount of money, curated events. What is curated are the speakers, but also the audience. I'm talking about TED-like events, like Aspen Festival of Ideas, Renaissance Weekends, and this and that. A university could be seen in the same way. You can extract people from here and there. You'll have a speaker today that is one of those people produced by this network. In fact, the word network will appear like prominently in your talk. So we want, in the process of you being here, discover things that are here. So these changes will not be instantaneous, but we want to be more and more connected with people who have emerged from programs like this, MEM being one of the jewels of McCormick. So with that being said, I really want to give my thanks to Mark for asking me to say a few words to you, and I wish you a very successful event. Thank you.
So before I introduce Zach, I'd like to just say a few words about MEM so that you get a sense of our history and our legacy. First of all, I'm an alum of MEM from 1987. This program is 37 years old. It was founded by a director named Al Rubenstein, who recently passed away, and we have now in his honor and in his memory an Al Rubenstein Memorial Scholarship Fund. So any surplus from tonight, any surplus from nights like this going forward, any surplus from our executive education programs, which are also starting to ramp up, will be forwarded to that fund. Did anyone know Al Rubenstein at all? Was anyone his student? You know? Okay, back there. All right, so we're dating ourselves. I think he stopped being director around 1994, somewhere in that range, right? MEM has over 800 alumni in the Chicagoland and across the country. 800 alumni are actually registered in our LinkedIn profiles, in our LinkedIn groups. So if you're not already part of our LinkedIn group, please join it. That's reason enough. We are also part of a consortium of schools, the MEMPC, that includes some of the best schools in the country that teach programs either equal to or similar to the MEM program. These schools include MIT, Stanford, Duke, Dartmouth, Cornell, and USC. So we've got some excellent company. We are one of the founding members of the MEMPC. One of the value adds that comes from being in a consortium like that is that we have joint alumni events. So alumni from the Chicagoland area, from those schools, get together on a regular basis. So that's another value add that comes from that network. So please join, please participate, please stay involved. So I mentioned that we're doing executive ed. We're doing some workshops now this year, mostly focused in the area of analytics. We leverage our alumni base, but we also leverage our advisory board. So anyone here who would like to participate in our advisory board, please see me or please see Steve Tilley. We'll be glad to talk to you about either of those opportunities. Before I go too much further, I do want to acknowledge the excellent sponsors we have tonight. Our purple sponsor, Motorola. Our silver sponsors, we got Chicago Tube and Iron. We've got HERE, Hugh Freedy, and Navigant. And we'll thank them again in the dinner later tonight. So without further ado, let me introduce Zack Johnson. Zack is a founder of a small company called Syndio, which is focused on social network analysis for corporations. He's going to talk to you about the opportunities. He's also going to talk to you about his background, I hope, because he is an alum of Northwestern, specifically the same department we reside in, IEMS, correct? No? Communications. Oh, close enough. Oh, sorry. Well, we're still welcome here, I think, right? Uh-oh, there's a story that bridges to IEMS. But I know that you do work with one of our professors, Nosh Contractor, who is definitively IEMS. So there you go. We got an anchor here, right? He's going to talk to you about the startup process he went through and some of the opportunities that social network analysis brings. So without further ado, Zack Johnson.
Thank you, Mark. Oh, I've got mic'd up already. How's everyone doing? Having a good night? I can tell there's booze in front of you. So I get to do a lot of talks, and I think this is the first where almost every single person is drinking during it. So this is great because if I'm miserable, I'm never going to know. And I see not only are some people drinking, but I see people actually with double fisting. So this is going to be a really good time all the way around. So Mark stole my thunder a little bit in that it's right. I am not an engineer. I'm an interloper here. I'm originally from the School of Communication, but I did take a number of engineering classes while I was here, and I wound up starting a company with a professor who has a triple appointment, not sure contractor in Kellogg, the School of Engineering, and the School of Comm as well. And this actually, I'm not just saying it to make fun of myself, but it does tie in a little bit to what I want to talk to you today about. Because one of the reasons why communication is so attractive to people is if you grew up kind of a natural communicator and someone who likes spending time with people and likes spending time interacting and watching people and picking apart how interactions happen, it's a very intuitive science. And when you look at management, there's different schools of thought around management, right? There's management with a capital M, where you're looking at marketing and price and promotion and strategy and all the stuff that you can spreadsheet and put in Excel. But there's also management that feels a lot more like what attracted me to communication, which is using your intuition to figure out which people would work well together, or sensing, this person might not be a right fit for the role, right? When you think about how people manage people in companies, as much as we all love to quantify and measure the world around us, it's really a lot of guessing, right? Who should go on this team? Who do we hire? Who do we fire? Think about every performance review you've ever gotten. How many performance reviews have you had where you felt like, man, they really quantified the work that I did well? Yeah, exactly. It's completely made up for the most part. So what struck me was when I was an undergrad, I was actually working in music, so I was helping pop and hip-hop artists build fan bases, and I wound up taking a class with Nosh. And being that I was in comm, it was the first class where I saw numbers in a while. And I was in there, and we were learning about social network analysis. And I'm sure many of you have taken classes with Nosh or taking network theory type classes. But if you haven't, it's really the math and science and theoretical underpinning of how people create, manage, and dissolve relationships. Super powerful stuff. The basic idea is if normally we measure people in terms of attributes of just themselves, we can go one step further and actually measure attributes of their relationships. Who talks to who, how much you like somebody, how much you trust somebody, how much you email, all these things you can look at between different agents. So you can do it between websites with hyperlinks. That's how Google has made their billions. Or you could also do it with people. And what blew my mind was you have all this data in companies, right? So people emailing, using chat systems, sending people documents on shared collaboration spaces. You have an absolute need for this. You have companies that are just miserably slow and suck at getting stuff done. And you have the technology to make sense of it. But why weren't companies doing this? And being young and naive, which is where all the best ideas come from, I was like, well, obviously every company does this because I'm learning about it in school. So I wound up taking doing a research assistantship with Nosh. It was funded by the School of Engineering, working with NASA and Rockefeller, US Army, all these really cool funded grants. And we were doing some work with a couple large companies, and we found out there was nothing to be had here. So having no idea what it meant to do enterprise with a capital E, I'm like, let's start a business, let's do this. So with support from the School of Engineering, actually Mike Marasco in particular in the Farley Center, we undertook a study to create a business plan for this. Now, mind you, when it's a one-person, I believe Mike was my sole teacher here, a one-person business class tends to yield ugly business plans. It was like 120 pages, which is like an order of magnitude more than the number of pages you should probably have in a business plan. But what was cool is we found one thing, which is if we sold just one consulting engagement, it would fund me for a year because I needed like a roof, and that was about it at the time. And what started 6 years ago, this was in 2009, has since grown. So it took a little bit. We bootstrapped up a consulting firm, eventually built products around it. But what's been exciting is we've been watching the market change year over year. And people analytics, which is the space we tend to be lumped into, has evolved from something that was really an academic thought about how do we take science and apply it to the enterprise to something where people are buying it now. People are applying it in their day-to-day work. And it's thrilling for us because we've been betting on it for the last few years. But why it's important for tonight is because the province of communication professionals and HR professionals and folks who tend to manage around soft and squishy things like communication, trust, leadership that we all know is important, it's now becoming the province of engineers. And when you think about the world that you're working in now and the world you're going to be working in over the next few years, it's going to be dictated by engineers. Because now it's possible to measure these things, and it's possible to benchmark them, and most importantly, it's possible to act on them. So what I'd love to do tonight is briefly show you a little bit about what we do, but in particular how it's impacting the enterprise, and how things that came from research that was done here and thinking that was done here is now being broadly applied and beginning to be even more deeply applied across a number of different contexts. So as all good presentations should start, I'd love to start with a story. It's about one of my all-time favorite companies, Blockbuster Video. I'm sure some of you, everyone been to Blockbuster Video before? $5 to rent a movie? That sucked, right? It was horrible. It's like kind of like when you do Comcast On Demand now. And what's crazy, I love Blockbuster, and you could literally replace this now with like Radio Shack, Circuit City, Tower Records. Am I missing anyone? Borders is a great one. You're looking at companies that were just behemoths who don't exist anymore, right? And it's really crazy to think about that because when you live in like the startup world, everyone's talking about how they're killing it, how they have momentum. Like we have, we just hired our 11th employee. We're hiring a new employee every month. And we just got a new office that fits 80 people, and that's awesome. But like Blockbuster was absolutely killing it with the capital K. These guys had, what was it? It was like 60,000 employees. That's a lot. That's a lot of people. They had virtually unlimited money. Like they could have bought anything or brought any person on board they ever could have wanted to. Think about the margins they had on renting videos. Like every time I rented Terminator 2, which when I was like 10 years old was probably like, 40 or 50 times, they probably made like 90 cents to the dollar on that, right? They even had, I think it was like 9,000 stores. So it was huge brand equity, everything they had, perfect, right? Blockbuster doesn't exist anymore. Like they're not even like a boutique store like Vinyl Records or something like that. And when you think about why, you look and you see like Netflix, right? You're like, well, obviously they ignored like mail DVDs, which at the time was kind of a crazy idea, but you could see how it makes sense. And then they ignored streaming, right? And it's so obvious they should have done it. Well, it was actually so obvious that they had the opportunity to buy Netflix for like $50 million back in 2000. And $50 million is like a dinner tab when you have a company that big. So when you think about it, though, it's like, well, wait, why did this happen? Clearly not everyone at Blockbuster was dumb. You had a ton of brilliant people. Clearly they had the money for it. They had the power, the resource. They could pick up the phone and call anybody. The reason why is because when companies get big and when people try to work together at scale, they atrophy. They're so slow. They don't know who the right people are to bring together to make stuff happen. And when you think about it, it's really kind of an HR problem in a lot of ways and a people problem. I put HR in it because that's the label that a lot of people like to use in business when you think about people, but it's really collective because it comes together. And the reason why is when you get that big and you don't know who the best people you have are, you don't know who's the dream team we bring together to figure out, do we buy Netflix or not? Who's the team you put together to make sure we're adopting all the new tools and technologies and processes we need to succeed? So when you look at HR, the way that companies typically do it is the bare minimum, it's the bottom. It's compensation, benefits, payroll, all the stuff that like no one really wants to do, so you stick it on somebody else. The differentiators, though, are like onboarding people, succession planning, talent development. When you look at current HR tools in the market, like your Workdays and your HRIS systems, they're focused on, can we maximize the value of an employee as we can measure today? But anybody who's a student of business or business books or has ever met an awesome leader or had an awesome manager knows that the differentiating factors are everything at the top. It's culture, it's collaboration, it's innovation, it's agility. It's all those intangible aspects of business that keep Blockbuster from being Blockbuster, right? It's the reason why, Apple created the iPhone and Samsung had all the pieces but couldn't make it happen, right? So you have these intangibles that are separating massive differences between companies, but it's hard to measure. And the reason why is organizations, they think about the world like this, right? It's the formal hierarchy. You've got Mr. and Mrs. CEO, they snap their fingers, everyone's supposed to do what you say. The problem is, though, they don't always work like that, right? And you need this structure. You have to have responsibility, accountability. You have to have, roles and division of labor. But when you think about every job you've ever worked in, it looks a lot more like this, right? You have certain people who, by virtue of their personalities, maybe their roles, the skills they have, maybe they just happen to fly back and forth between two offices constantly. They're more trusted. They know the right information each time. They connect you to the people who can help you solve problems. Those people, they're a lot of times worth a lot more than you pay them. Also, if they leave, they might make your job absolutely miserable, because that was one of the reasons why you worked there. Organizations right now, they don't measure the lines, they just measure the circles. So what we've been doing over the past few years is focusing on systematically measure, tracking, and incentivizing those incredible people by grabbing data on their relationships. Because if you can map, measure, and make sense of relationships, you can kind of crowdsource really accurate information about people and figure out who are your most badass people, who are the change agents who, if you tell 10 people about something, everyone else is going to know about it in an hour. Who are your innovators, right? Who your experts go to for advice. Who are your high potential employees who are super young and precocious and hot-headed, but are getting stuff done faster than everybody else? Those are the people you cannot afford to lose. Those are the people you have to bring together to be agile. And those are the people who, when you think about how your company is going to last for the next 50 or 100 years, you have to bring to the table to get it done. So what we do is we compare this within organizations. So we grab a lot of network data, and I'll go through exactly how we do it. But we grab a lot of network data, kind of part of it's through surveys, part of it's through digital data, and we compare within organizations. So each and every person we map has a profile. So you can actually rank order everybody by innovativeness, collaboration, et cetera. All those things that you were guessing on before, you can print out a list now to show how people stack up. You can do the same thing for groups. So if you're a department leader and you've got a globally or functionally dispersed organization, you're going to fly around to every organization in the company, you know which ones you need to spend extra time with because you can rank them all by the same things. So functions, sites, divisions, units, global business groups, however your company does it, it's possible to do that now with this technology. Additionally, and where this stuff's going to get super exciting, and I have at the end of this a couple slides to put on our futures hat, is to compare between organizations. So we've already started, and a couple other orgs have started, not only looking at this within organizations, but saying if we have soft and squishy factors from a whole bunch of organizations, what happens when we put it side by side? Because when you put it side by side, and you look at employees side by side, and you compare it to indicators like how much people sell, their output, their happiness at work, their engagement, things like that, now what you can see is people who look like X sell like Y. Or people who have been with the org this long are this likely to stay. Now you get to the area where you can quantify on an on-the-go basis all those intangible aspects of business that drive results. And when I started this off by saying that what was the province of communicators is now the province of engineers, it's thinking critically about the data you have and thinking critically about the algorithms you're using, and most importantly, thinking critically about how do you build experiences that embed this into the decisions that people are making, that over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to fundamentally change how people manage large businesses. Last thing you can track over time to see how all that stuff comes together. So how does it work? Data collection, analysis, and then workflows. I'll walk you through a little bit so you can get a sense of how this stuff happens. But what's exciting is you're seeing some of the largest orgs in the world in different industries already adopt this. So while some of it is still a little bit in the future, you already have organizations that many of you have probably worked for in the past, a lot of local orgs and like consumer packaged goods, energy, large insurance, et cetera, are adopting these tools and technologies. So from a data collection standpoint, what's cool is there's a couple different ways you can get this. And the primary ways that we do it by and that other people do it by are surveying and then using digital data. Now, usually when people hear surveys, they cringe because they suck and no one likes taking surveys. Network surveys are a little bit different. Instead of answering just about yourself, you're going to answer about your specific peers, right? So you're going to say, I go to Willem because I trust Willem and he helps me adapt to new things. Every time you answer a question about someone else, it creates a relational element, the same way an email from one person would to someone else. What this allows you to do is ask people in companies, who do you go to for these things, and actually positively praise their peers when they're almost never asked to do it. So when you think about how often you're asked for feedback in your company, it's usually like 360-degree feedbacks or engagement surveys. You rarely get to say, hey, this person helped me out, each and every time they do it. So that's one component. The data's super accurate because it's really hard to cheat. Even if you don't take it, people are still answering about you. And if you answer about 500 people and no one answers about you, your score's not going to be particularly high. In addition, though, where this gets really exciting is when you factor in who emails who chats with who meets with who on the calendar, all these different things, you can build up and validate upon what people self-select. So when you think about where this is going to be in organizations soon, you're going to have a giant central brain, all this data coming in, and then lots of different ways to interface with it. Think of it as like a giant totem pole. And what's really powerful is right now you have a lot of organizations sitting on a lot of this data and they're not quite sure what to do with it, so the timing's kind of ripe for this stuff. And then when you think about how to analyze it, I'll just go through a little bit. For us, we tend to use primarily social network metrics, but there's a whole bunch of different things you can use around modeling, agent-based systems, predictive analytics, et cetera. But what we've focused on, and one of the things that I think's valuable to think about as engineers who are focused on building businesses and applying to business, is it's not always the most complicated stuff or the hardest to do thing that makes the best business proposition, right? When we started out doing this, we were doing the Formula One of analytics. Like we were working with a large CPG company, and they had a tool they wanted 3,000 people to adopt. They're like, all right, pick the perfect team of people to make this thing go viral. And when we were looking at it, we were saying, all right, well, let's say if we just pick the top 64 most influential people, 64 was their magic number, you're going to have a lot of overlap. So let's make sure we use the diffusion model so that those 64 people, their networks combine to be greater than they would ever be alone, right? So if you have a bunch of people up here, you want to add some people down here too. But then they're like, well, wait a second, we need to make sure we have some people from our Asian offices, from our South American offices, people in packaging design, all these different areas, right? It was a packaging R&D group. So they're like, all right, let's bake a cost function optimization into a diffusion model. Then they're like, well, wait a second, when we bring everyone together for an event, they're all going to come down, people who didn't know each other before, they're going to meet, they're going to mingle, and you're going to change the network. So let's predict and bake a model into this to figure out, predictive model to figure out who's going to meet each other, and then we're going to bring it all together and you have your perfect group of 64. Now that's awesome, but also costs like $250,000. Like, did you really need a $250,000 algorithm to solve that problem? No, probably like a $50,000 or $75,000 thing would have done the trick, but because you could, we did. So what we learned, though, was that, wait a second, there's all these simple parts of network analysis, right? Like basic centrality, just looking at groups and profiles, things that no one had really perfected, but scientists tend to skip over because it was the easy stuff and the boring stuff, that when given to customers in the right way, was by far the most useful. And it stuck with them. And by listening to the people we were working with, we learned that, wait a second, all that money we were spending on engineering off the bat to develop, and create awesome science, we needed to think more about the experience itself. So when you look at our tools, we draw from network analysis. So we go to all our building blocks come from published literature. The same centrality metrics we use are the same ones you use in class. We just mix and match them in like metric cocktails to describe people as change agents as opposed to someone who has a high eigenvector centrality, right? And what's exciting, though, is once you have the delivery system right, you can build in that science. And one thing that really good engineers we've worked with have done well is taking the building blocks you need and then putting all the science in the back end. Because if you make experiences that delight, no one's going to fiddle with how the thing works. So and this is a kite diagram. I'm looking at the time, and we're going to have to eat at some point. So when you think about network analysis, one thing we use a lot to illustrate is like the kite diagram. So when you think about influencers, you think about like connectors, brokers, et cetera, and a whole bunch of different types of centrality. What's cool is when you do the survey model and you do the email piece, you can build up additive scores for people. So think about it as like 50% of your score comes from the survey questions, and there's about 18 different relational points you can have between two people in a survey. So you can have reciprocity for each one as well. What it allows you to do is have extremely accurate metrics with outbugging people too much. So it's pretty cool stuff. And then when you talk about existing workflows, so to give you a sense of how this is being used, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with how some of these processes work in organizations from your own experiences, but our tools tend to be integrated into the following. So talent management, change management, succession planning, onboarding, et cetera. It's augmenting things, it's not replacing them. So when someone, I'll give you an example in a minute with the next slide, but if someone's going to build a team, usually they guess about it. Now they go to the tool, type really quickly a couple of quick parameters, they have their list of people. They can take the list if they want it, or they can add the people that they normally have themselves. So it does create kind of a back and forth where it's not replacing how people are doing things, it's just adding it in. So like all good technology, there's still a human component to it, but it's give and take a little bit. And I'll tell you a couple stories. So one of my favorite stories is, because it's about young people, and we do a lot of work in energy. One of our clients is a large energy company. They have a lot of nuclear reactors. And the challenge they have is you have lots of young employees, and with changing demographics around millennials and young people in the workplace, if you're young and precocious and you want to get stuff done, if you're not noticed in like 5 or 8 years, you're going to get a little bit antsy about your job, right? Or even sooner than that. That happens all the time. So you have these large companies that have been around for 100 years. And it's not like you can just take anybody and throw them in charge of a nuclear reactor, right? You need to have people who are trained up and do this. But these companies are bleeding really top-level talent and top-level high-performing young talent. So we were brought into a company that had a program where basically everyone was kind of nominated by their managers. So when you think about programs where people are nominated by their managers, yeah, I hope you like your manager. I hope you guys drink a lot together. Like, that's the only way this is ever going to happen, right? So we came in, we were able to map the network and figure out, all right, let's figure out who all these scores, take some HR data, and filter. So here's like a rank list. This is like a screenshot from our tool. You're going to look at like collaborations, some different scores, and then filter by people who have been there for like less than 5 years, who have performance ratings of like A or B in their traditional HR performance tracking system. And then voila, in like 20 seconds, you have the list of everybody. The data already exists. You're just querying it much faster than you ever would have in a much more accurate way. When they did this, they had double the turnover in that group, and they had incredible participation when they brought all these people to their offsite. They also had better diversity. They made sure that they had people from all the different functions, divisions, sites, and groups they needed to make it happen. It doesn't really change what they're doing. It just changed how they picked what they're doing. Another one that's fun, diagnosing communication health. So we work in all different orgs. We work with customers ranging from P&G to children's hospitals, to schools, community colleges, everything in between. We're even doing our first international airport right now. One of the coolest is working with a hospital, because with hospitals, you're not just talking about, are you going to shave a couple of basis points off your gross margins? You're looking at, are you going to save lives? And we were working with a children's hospital. And one of the challenges around children's hospitals is physical layout. So one thing you might have studied in design class is the layout you have of a building can fundamentally change communication. So are you all familiar with like baby bays in hospitals? So like it's like a neonatal intensive care unit. It's when you see in the movies all the screaming babies in one room and you're like, I would never want to actually spend time in that room. The reason why those are awesome is because you can have line of sight. So if there's an emergency, 2 nurses can see each other, look across the room, and there's a doctor over there, and you can immediately get there. There's been a movement as of late to single-family rooms. Single-family rooms, they're all about giving families privacy. So you have different rooms and your baby's in there alone. It makes it way harder, though, to respond to a disaster situation. So one of the things we did was, in an intensive care unit of a pediatric hospital, we looked at how communication was impacted by the space. What we found was there were key groups, like the respiratory group, et cetera, who, because of the space they were in and moving from the previous hospital, were very limited in their ability to communicate in disaster situations. So you're able to figure out who are the key people, bring them together, and then dramatically improve outcomes, reduce unnecessary communication, and do this over time. So it's applying the same type of thinking to a dramatically different problem than the last one. One last example is talking about a CPG company. We do a lot of work with CPG R&D groups. What's kind of crazy is a lot of times incentives don't line up with the things that you want. So the challenge with R&D, and a lot of you probably wind up working with R&D organizations, is they reward on the basis of the patent system. And the problem is you're going to have bosses who tell you, collaborate, share what you're doing, it yields the best results. But then they're going to reward like the person who came up with the idea. You're like, well, wait a second, I could have spent my time coming up with my own idea, and then I'd be the hero. So you have this disconnect where it's like, do one thing, but we're going to pay you for the exact opposite of what we just asked you to do. And what we wound up doing was we went into this company, we're able to map this, and by actually having people participate in the survey model, it tells folks, okay, you're actually going to be mapping and tracking and holding us accountable to communication, collaboration, innovation, et cetera. But then also they found that there were 5 people out of about 400 who accounted for 35% of all group-to-group communication and collaboration. Think about that for a second. There are 5 people who, if they're all flying on the same plane, the plane just dropped out of the sky, would just completely destroy how all these groups across the world were communicating. This is like a $70 billion a year company. And these people, they're really hard to replace. Turns out 3 of them were talking about leaving, 2 of which were in salary negotiations to the tune of like $5,000 a year extra. We caught these guys right in time, about to fire the people who were doing the thing that they said they want everyone else to do, who were picked by all the peers as being the best people at this thing, over like $5,000, which is, like we said, like a drink bill for that group at night. So we were able to catch that in the nick of time. But what's cool is our customers are finding this stuff left and right and applying it to their decisions to make sure they don't wind up in those rough situations. So one last thing I'll do is just how can you do this in your own organizations? One way is obviously you can pay me to do it. That's a lot of fun. Another way you could do it, though, is you can hire internally. So folks from programs like yours, there's also a Master's in Analytics program here. There are people with expertise in social network analysis and social network analytics who can be brought on to apply this. I will tell you from having built this over the past 6 years, it's not something that one person's going to solve unilaterally for your organization, but it is capability you can hire. Additionally, there is academic partnerships. So the way that a lot of our early customers dipped their feet in the water here was they partnered with organizations like Northwestern, like USC, et cetera, who had professors willing to do research. So that's another way. And then the last way is there are firms like us out there where you can pay and have people come in and do it for you. But it's exciting because you're seeing some of this capability come up with some of the big providers as well, and it's definitely changing the workplace. And one last point, and I'll close it up, but all new technology has risk factors. And you're probably wondering about privacy and data quality and things like that. These are issues that the marketplace is working through as individual companies are working through it too. So this looks very different in the US than this looks in Europe, than this looks in Asia, right? If you want to do this in Germany, there are very different rules than if you're going to do it stateside. Additionally, what data you can look at changes company to company. In some company, I could read every single email you ever had. We don't look at semantic data because it can really freak people out. But structural data is fair game in almost any company in the US. Just depends on what your employer is willing to do. So another thing that is important about this is not only as someone who might use this to improve their organization, just being aware of it as employees. It's understanding how's this data being used, how can I take advantage of it, and how's this going to change and influence me as an employee and the work that I do. And lastly, misinterpretation. It's not idiot-proof. I wish we could make a tool that's idiot-proof, but like all things in business, it is subject to human error. So we do try to coach our customers the best way possible using it, but that's where engineers come into. It's making sure that the tools are effective, that they make sense, and that it's something that, as I think it was Warren Buffett said, the best CEOs, or he likes to run businesses that an idiot could run, because one day, eventually, one will. So the same thing with tools and all things engineers should build. Eventually, an idiot's can be using whatever you make, so just make sure that it's ready for that day. So thank you very much for your time tonight. I hope you enjoyed dinner. And if you have any questions or comments or want to chat, I'll be around all night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Nice job. Nice job.
So imagine all the applications that you can have for social network analysis. About a year and a half ago, we did a competition with Accenture, and Accenture sponsored a social network competition where we actually did social network analysis based on Wi-Fi data. And some of the results of that were quite astounding. It was reminiscent, watching this presentation, it was reminiscent of the same results we had, what was that, Jennifer, a year ago? 2 years ago? 2 years, 2 years ago. So there's a connection here in terms of what MEM and MSIA students are capable of delivering. So thanks again, Zach, excellent presentation.